Welcome back to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor. Today we have the incredible Dr. Julia Galindo joining us. Julia is a former faculty member in the Harvard Writing Program who's helped countless students navigate the challenges of college level writing. She's also a trained executive function coach and specializes in helping writers break down overwhelming tasks or break through the blocks that are keeping them from writing. Prior to becoming a coach, Julia taught the popular course, The Psychology of Success and Failure. In addition to having taught writing, Julia also brings over 5 years of experience tutoring students at the Harvard Graduate School of Education's Writing Center, and her work as an editor on the Harvard Educational Review. In this episode, we dive into Julia's journey from academia to entrepreneurship. She shares her insights on the burnout she experienced as faculty, the liberating process of leaving academia, and the skills she's leveraged to build a freelance editing business. We also explore the importance of finding a balance between coaching clients and dedicating time to solo work. This is good for introverts or HSPs, highly sensitive people like Julia and me. We also talk about Julia's passion for helping students overcome the obstacles they face in their academic pursuits. So, if you're struggling with burnout in academia or you're an aspiring academic editor, I hope this conversation will help show you that you don't have to stay where you're unhappy, and you can indeed find joy by applying your academic training as a freelance editor. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. We have on the podcast today Julia Galindo, who is an former academic,
Yeah.
and now an editor and a coach. Thank you, Julia, for being here. Why
Thank
don't
you
we
so much
go
for having
ahead?
me.
Oh, yep. Why don't we go ahead and get started? And you can tell us a little bit about your background and why you left academia.
So I worked at Harvard. I was on the faculty of the writing program there. And my full-time job was teaching writing to first year students. Basically like an expository writing class. So like how to write an academic paper. Like, welcome to college. Here's what you're supposed to be doing in all of your other classes. And it was a good setup. It was we could all faculty could kind of choose um the field in which, to be the vehicle through which we taught writing. So like mine was a psychology based class, which I was always really interested in psychology. That was my background. The specific class that I taught was the psychology of success and failure. So those concepts were really interesting to talk about with first year students, especially at Harvard, where a lot of them have been kind of gunning to get their entire lives. And so I did that. That was my full time job, and then I did a lot of moonlighting at the Harvard Extension School. So sometimes like night classes or summer sessions. Um, the most recent thing I had done there was it was a master's level class in psychology. So students who were graduating with a master's degree in psychology would do this capstone project where they would do, it was a year-long course, and involved a lot of research. And then kind of like I would advise them on, sort of the development of their project over the course of the year. And they would end up with a final paper that's kind of similar to a thesis. Um, so probably from that description, you can guess like everything I taught was really writing heavy. Um, and I loved writing. I loved to think about writing. I loved to talk about like the craft of writing. I love to work on writing with students. But the more students you have, the more time consuming that becomes. And so I would say by the time I ended up leaving academia, um, part of it was COVID had started and, having family, young kids. Part of it was sort of personal reasons, but the other part was kind of just this burnout of kind of I think for the last several years, I was in academia. I was working 7 days a week, um, and I was kind of always thinking about work. So, like, I'd be rocking my daughter to sleep at night, kind of thinking about like, okay, what do I have to do? What's happening tomorrow? What papers haven't I looked at yet? Um, and so that's kind of where I was at the end of my academic career, just feeling, I'd say the high of academia, like what initially drew me to being in academia was like a love of learning, a love of kind of like the freshness and excitement of learning new material, being able to translate that to other people. And then, kind of the over time, the downward motion was just sort of being burned out with the amount of work, the sheer number of hours that I was devoting to work, and not having anything of a work life balance, as they say.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned working 7 days a week when you had kids, and I think that's similar to my story where it seems like before you have kids, you're able to hold it all together, like
Yes.
and because you just go home and work, right? Or,
Uh-huh.
your work
Yeah, you can
time.
work when you need to. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you have children, it's just the amount of home responsibilities increase so exponentially that you just can't juggle it all.
Yeah. That was a huge piece of it for me. I think, before because I started teaching, kind of at the end of my doctoral program. So I did like some adjuncting, some teaching then and that was before I had kids. And exactly like you said, like I really managed that by just working all the time. Like by any time that whatever I needed to do, I did it. I would just make the time to do the preparation for class that I needed to do the grading that I needed to do. Um, and when you have kids and you're kind of like just emotionally like pouring out that side of you into little people that need you and don't have a particular schedule on which they need you, like they just need you when they need you. It gets really hard to balance that with kind of like, oh, but I have these deadlines and I have, this other group of people that needs things from me, that's expecting something from me. So yeah, that was a huge part of it. Just really sort of feeling crushed by that impossible task of being a parent and also kind of doing being a professor the way I wanted to be a professor. Like I wanted to sort of show up at 100% capacity and give students my all. And it was I think even just like sort of internally, it wore away at me to feel like, oh, I'm just like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I it's funny, I think I was talking to somebody the other day and I think she has older children, but she also has a mother who lives on the other side of the country and
Oh,
is getting older and has some health issues and it just seems like when you have that kind of change in the family structure or, the health situation, it really forces us to put into perspective what's most important, and to sort of
mm,
reprioritize our lives. And
yeah.
so I think that applies to parents as well as other people who are caregivers. But it sounds like you've had a lot of experience in the Harvard writing program and especially teaching people how to write. And so I'm curious, how did you learn about editing as a career? Did you know about it before you encountered me? Or, what sort of attracted you to this idea of becoming an editor?
Sure. So I wish I had met you 5 years ago. That would have been great for my life trajectory. But I had some editing experience as a doctoral student. Like I worked on the board of the Harvard Educational Review. So I think because I love writing and I love learning, I always have been, for a long time, I've been doing things that are sort of writing adjacent. And I would consider editing adjacent to writing. But I discovered your course, I think on Facebook. I saw something that you had posted about it. Um, and when I watched your webinar, I was kind of like, just completely sold. I was like, yes, this woman gets me. Like she gets my experience. She gets what it was like in academia. She gets, sort of like I think I think what attracted me to your message the most was just sort of like the that it represented kind of a hopeful alternative pathway. Like there's a way so much like we spend all of this time getting our degree, working really hard, only to hear like, well, now you're stuck in this very narrow pathway. Like you've educated yourself to do this one thing. And I think a lot of the messages that you hear inside of academia, certainly that I heard, were kind of like, well, this is what you've been trained to do. You're not really trained to do anything else. And then what I loved about your message was like, no, you can do other things. You can kind of open up your horizons, and think outside of that very kind of traditional trajectory, of being an academic and kind of staying within the university, because the skills that you have as an academic are transferable, to editing. And so that to me was a very hopeful message, and the message that I think is true. Like that's been my experience, that when I've done the editing test, or when I've looked at colleagues' papers, it's very much, the nature of editing professionally is very similar to the nature of the work I was doing as an academic. So it's not a huge, there are some differences, but it's not a huge switch to have to make. And so that was really, I think, what drew me to editing was your message of kind of like, this is very doable. And, through my experiences and my course, I'm going to show you the steps. That's the other thing I think you've done that's been very helpful. Um, because I think all of us making a change, there's so much shame around leaving academia. There's such a message of like, well, maybe you just couldn't hack it. Like maybe you weren't strong enough, or maybe you weren't good enough. And so to encounter someone like you who is really sort of showing like, no, there's actually a different way. And there's a way in which you can have a life that is a better life for you. It might be, it's a better fit. And that's possible, for everyone. That was a huge draw for me.
That's awesome. There's so much you said in there that I think so many people are gonna just feel like, like you said with the webinar, that she gets me. I think they're gonna feel like
Mm.
you really get them.
Oh,
Um, because yeah, I remember being when I was in academia, and I know that I give the impression now that like I've got everything figured out and here's how you live this life and it's beautiful, and it is beautiful, but it took me a while to get there too. And I remember being in
Mm,
academia just feeling like there was a boulder on my chest, just every day. Like the anxiety was horrible, the stress was horrible, trying to juggle everything was horrible, and you're constantly criticized by everybody, and it's not intentional, it's just the way the system is designed, right? When we try to
mm,
publish, we're getting negative feedback.
mm,
You're always worried about student evaluations and getting negative feedback, and there's very little in the system that other than maybe like annual faculty awards or something,
yeah.
that's meant to cheer you on. Um and I think, just like you were saying, it's just you can leave that and find hope. Um, the other thing that really stood out to me in what you just said is how so many people in academia feel like they can't do anything else, or they don't have these other skills. And when you're able to step outside that box, to the
Mm,
box that we're sort of put in academia, if you could step outside it and kind of look from the outside in, you realize that people with graduate degrees are some of the most intelligent and hardworking people ever. And
mm,
just like the persistence that it takes to finish your PhD, or, whatever terminal degree you're finishing, that's incredible. I mean, so many people drop out of these programs because they can't stick with it, and if you're able to follow
mm.
through and to do it, and to go on the academic job market, that's crazy persistence. So, yeah, I think we're taught to see ourselves in a very negative light, and it's wonderful to hear that now that you're starting to move out of that space, you're seeing that and you're feeling that too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember thinking like toward the end of my doctoral program, because I started feeling like I don't know that I want to do this for the rest of my life. Like I don't know that I want to I know, I wasn't willing to go to do a nationwide job search and just move anywhere and kind of not care about where I lived. And I just didn't, like, something about sort of being on this pipeline, to tenure just didn't appeal to me, kind of like instinctively. And I remember meeting with different people, in administration and kind of just repeatedly hearing from them like, well, there's not really like much I can tell you. Like our resources are for doctoral students who want to become academics. And it really led me to this place of kind of despair for a little while because I was like, why did I do this degree then? Like, why did I kind of overeducate myself? Like, why did I educate myself into this pocket where I don't want to live anymore or, don't want to continue living, following this path. And, I wanted to have a much more expansive life with options. And I kept hearing like, well, then you really just should have done a master's and stopped at that. Like you've gotten like, it's almost like you're too qualified to do anything other than, get a PhD or sorry, other than become a professor. And just intuitively, like that, I thought like that message, like it like sort of chafed. I was like, that can't be right. Like it can't be, I've worked so hard for this degree. I've, really trained my mind in interesting ways, like by, through the process of collecting data and doing the research and writing it up and, having all the set of experiences that I had in order to graduate with a doctorate. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me that that would mean I now have fewer options than what I would have had before. So I think, I think what you're doing, putting into the world kind of like, here's an alternative pathway and here's something that is actually very accessible for academics who have found themselves not happy in the academic world. I think that's such a gift because there are so few messages like that. Like there's still like very few resources for people in doctoral programs who don't want to stay in academia to be able to access.
Yeah, that and there's a lot of well, not there's a sort of pocket of people that I've discovered and connected with on LinkedIn who do coaching for people who want to go into industry. And
Mm,
they do fantastic work and they have such amazing advice. Um, but I'm happy to be able to offer another alternative, where you
mm,
can go into business, right? You can go into freelancing. And I think
yeah.
that idea can be very scary to a lot of academics, um, especially me, because I was raised by a single mom and never thought I could own a business. That sounded like something just totally in another world. And I really sought the security of a salaried job. Um,
Yes.
and so, I think that, being able to show people that you can do freelancing, you can be an entrepreneur. It's not like you're having to invest in a huge building and hiring people and all this stuff. It's quite a small enterprise, especially when you're first starting out. I wonder if you can speak to that transition because you're now wrapping up our first 12-week cohort. Um, what has that transition been like for you as you've moved from that identity of an academic into, a freelancer, coach, business owner?
So on the positive side, I would say like there's something very freeing and appealing about to me about working for yourself. Like just being able to be your own boss, set your own hours, decide which jobs you're going to take, which you're going to turn down, which clients you're going to work with, which are not such a good fit. In contrast to like getting a class of 40 students and like these are your students and it's your job to teach them and whatever interpersonal issues come up in during the semester, good luck. But those are your students. So there's something really freeing, I think, about the idea of being your own boss and even just not having, because I think as academics, we've had to jump through so many hoops. So the idea of like, I don't have to do another interview and, convince someone to hire me, because I'm working for myself. That really appeals to me. And then I think, the other side of it that you were speaking to it's scary. It's scary to like when you get hired by a company, there is that reassurance of like, okay, I know my paycheck is coming every 2 weeks or however often, and I know what's going to be in it, and that's predictable, and I can kind of plan my life around that. And that's where I think taking your course has been really helpful because what you've done is kind of like set out like here are the steps. Um, you've demystified like sort of how to do it. Like here are the steps that you can follow. Here's a suggested order in which to follow them. These are the things to think about. These are kind of like the basics to get set up first. These things are maybe extras that could wait until later, as opposed to like, I think if I had been on my own, I might have just been dropped into this flurry of like, well, what do I do first? And, do I need to be an LLC? Do I need to You know, all these questions of like, what is essential? What are the essential kind of startup pieces to begin an editing business? You've really laid those out for students in the course, which I think has been super helpful. The other thing I had thought of this earlier, I can't remember exactly what made me think of it, but the camaraderie has been really nice, like in the community discussions, like online and also during the classes. And that has helped me realize, oh, like I'm not alone in this. Like everyone is nervous. And I'm looking at the other people in the class and thinking like, wow, this person, is a chair of a department. This person is tenured. This person is, so impressive. And they're nervous too. So it kind of has led me to be like, okay, that's just part of going out on your own and starting your own business. Like there is anxiety associated with anything uncertain. Something new is bound to come with the uncertainty in the beginning. Like it's helped me kind of see it as part of like, oh, this is just par for the course. I'm feeling anxious about this because it's new and that's a really natural feeling. And I don't think I would have had that perspective had I not, first been led by you through the 12 weeks and second been exposed to the other people who are kind of going through the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, we've had fun, haven't we, in our weekly
Yeah.
meetings?
Yeah.
It has
Yeah. And
been
I should
great.
say,
Go ahead.
oh, just that, in the very beginning, I wasn't able to even attend the meeting live
Mm.
because I had childcare responsibilities. So I was always, even just from watching the videos and I wasn't there live, I felt like I knew all the other participants in the, like, I'm sure I feel like I know them better than they feel like they know me because I, saw them kind of through those weeks. But that was kind of great too, of just to sort of be able to listen, even if I couldn't make the live class, to be able to listen in later and get caught up.
Yeah,
So
and I
that's
mean,
good.
on the one hand, it's heartbreaking to find out how many people are so unhappy in academia.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's been awesome to share those experiences and to be able
Mm,
to talk to other people who get you, who speak the same language, and to be in that space where we know that we're no longer being judged, where we
mm,
can express how we're feeling, no matter how vulnerable we're being, we can share those things, and to have each other to cheer each other on. It's been really, really super fun. And, since you guys were the first cohort, I didn't really know how this was gonna turn out, and it's been better than I ever imagined, and so thank you to you and the other students because, it's been really a really cool experience for me too. But,
oh, that's great.
why don't you tell us about your business now and, how did you I remember there was a process of sort of narrowing down the options of what you wanted to work on. And tell us about how you came up with those ideas and then what you're planning to do as you go forward.
Sure. So I suffer, probably like many people, from having like 40 ideas at a time and wanting to do all of them and also wanting them to be perfect. That was something really helpful that you said in class a couple of weeks ago that helped kind of helped me name that, like wanting things to be absolutely perfect and for me myself to feel totally invulnerable before I launch anything. And so that has been a process I've been working through of sort of getting over the hump of like actually deciding on, a smaller offering so that I'm not trying to do everything. Because I guess actually just as an aside, I want to make sure that I don't accidentally kind of um redo my lack of life work balance, the one that I had in academia. Like I don't want to accidentally reproduce that here, like when I have the opportunity to do something totally different. And I do think that as an individual, my impetus is always to like work, 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 like just, like book all of my time and do things, from morning till night. And now that I have kind of the option to set things up differently, I want to make a different choice. But the first choice I made in terms of sort of narrowing my focus I had been working as a writing coach, working mainly with faculty, trying to finish like book chapters or books or articles, and doctoral students trying to finish their dissertations. I really love. I think my heart is with doctoral students because I just relate to that so much from my own experience as a doctoral student trying to get out of the program. So my kind of like ideal dream client is a doctoral student writing their dissertation. Um, And, I'm working with them as a writing coach. So sort of doing that, kind of two pronged, like doing that kind of developmental editing, like looking at their early drafts and giving feedback. But also sort of just talking through like what are the obstacles that are getting in their way that are keeping them from writing, or what are the kind of um, mental, internal, but also external, blocks that might be sort of like m- junking up their lives and keeping them from sitting down and getting their work done. Um, and so yeah, so that's my goal. That's the direction that I'm headed in. I recently completed a training to be an executive function coach, and that was kind of inspired by some of the doctoral students that I had been coaching. Got I think it's more common now to be diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. So a lot of people were sort of it's also common, I should say, to be diagnosed sort of in a situation that stresses you, like being a doctoral student. So sometimes like you might be going along fine and sort of managing uh, completely fine, but then you becoming a parent or entering a graduate program, those kinds of things can be a stressor that sometimes cause people to realize that they do have executive function challenges. And so I was working with a handful of students who had kind of received recent diagnoses of ADHD. And that prompted me to want to sort of get more training on that front to kind of think about like what are some particularly targeted methods and strategies for helping people with executive function challenges finish their dissertation.
That's really interesting. I had never thought about it that way, but that makes sense to me that if you have ADHD or something else, you develop these coping skills in your quote unquote normal life. But then when you get to
Yeah.
that stressful situation, it's sort of like the situation goes beyond the coping skills that you've developed. And I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but that's what it sounds like is that. And so it's
Yeah.
nice that you're able to help them, not just with the editing and the writing, but also figuring out, okay, what are some new skills that I can practice to help me get
Mm,
through this, which I'm sure are also super helpful when they become professors or go into industry or whatever it is they end up
yeah.
doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. What you just said actually helped me kind of articulate something for myself, which is that I think with teaching writing and with sort of teaching these executive function coping strategies, I think sort of like they have sort of a common root for me in that like I think my passion about that is sort of demystifying things or like making things more accessible. Like when I got to graduate school, I felt like um I felt like I had just missed something, like I had missed some class on writing instruction that other people had gotten, and I think I had been able to skate by and actually do well, like in, high school and undergrad as a writer because I like to read, and so, like, I just sort of had this intuitive sense of like, well, this is what writing is supposed to sound like, but I had never received any kind of, like, explicit instruction, and even through graduate school, it was like I started to become aware of the gaps in what I knew, but I didn't quite know how to fill those gaps until I started teaching writing. And I realized like there is just a wealth of resources out there on like making these kinds of things accessible. Like this is what a thesis is. This is how you write a thesis. This is what's supposed to be in this kind of paper. And it just made me kind of lament like graduate school would have been so much I shouldn't say so much easier, but it would have been easier if those things had been made explicit to me sooner. And so I think that's kind of my passion is to like teach that going forward, like to help other people who are in that position right now access those things that are going to make their lives easier, whether it be particular writing strategies or not just knowledge about what a particular piece of writing is supposed to do, how it's supposed to function, or sort of accessing like thinking strategies or coping strategies that are going to make someone with executive function challenges better positioned to be able to accomplish their goals.
Yeah, I think it's so great that you are focused on these ways of helping people through these processes because, we go to graduate school and we have an advisor who is almost entirely focused on the scholarship, and the what are our research methods and, how are we structuring our writing and which journals should you submit to and those kinds of things. But I think it's very rare to have an advisor who uh, is concerned with your well-being, and also just to think sort of in more holistic sense of um, how do I how do I think about tackling these projects? How do I what are my strategies for getting my writing done? How do I juggle teaching a 4-4 load or a 3-4 load or whatever people are doing, and meeting my writing goals? No one really teaches us that. And it's very hard to go into a tenure track job or even a non-tenure track job and balance all of those things. So I just think it's fantastic that you are offering, to doctoral students so much more than just editing and how do I finish my dissertation. You're almost taking on this life coaching role where you're able to
Mm.
help them with the executive function challenges, or even if they're not dealing with those issues, just the general, like, how do I get through this? What are strategies I can do to be successful? So I wonder, since you've done some coaching, you've done some editing, um, what do you think are your goals for the next, say, 1 to 3 years? What are you envisioning for yourself? And maybe I can offer some tips of how to get there, or we could talk about potential challenges that you think might come up, or anything like that.
Sure. So I think where I am right now is trying to figure out what is the best balance for me in terms of like people facing time, which I would consider coaching, sort of like the live kind of one on one, having a conversation with someone versus the sort of solo work time, which, as an introvert, I also identify as like a highly sensitive person. In the Elaine Aron sense of that word, I really do get filled up by alone time. Um, and just, I guess, circling back to our earlier conversation, like you don't get much when you're a parent. So, needing some alone time at work becomes like even more essential. Like if you're not getting any at home or in your sort of, your lifetime, um, having some during those working hours becomes even more key. So I think, for me, when I think of kind of editing, it's like me sitting alone at my laptop with a piece sort of like going deep in my head, thinking about the person's work and, writing comments to them or, making some edits into the text. And that is like that kind of work fills me up in a different way than the coaching meetings, which, I can get like a boost of like the social interaction, the connection with another person. But I also sort of have like limited emotional energy for that. Like I've just found with like if I were to book 8 coaching appointments in a day, I by like actually probably by hour 4, I would be fading. Like I just couldn't, and actually I remember that from teaching, like part of what like one kind of obligation within our department was to meet with each student individually about each essay that they had written. And when you have 30 students a semester, that's like multiple times in a semester, you're meeting with 30 students over the course of 1 week. And by the end of those weeks, I'd be sort of invigorated at the beginning and like charged up and like, yeah, let's get through this. And it's fun to sit down with someone and talk about their writing. But by the end of the week, I would be like, I need to sleep for 12 hours. Like that was really tough. So I would say that's a challenge. And I would be curious to know what your thoughts are on that, or if you have encountered that in your own life and kind of, with the caveat that everyone is different and everyone needs different amounts of different kinds of time. Like, have you solved that problem for yourself in terms of like how much of your working life is spent alone, kind of doing focused intellectual work versus how much time is spent interacting directly with other people?
That's a great question. And I'm so glad you brought up the highly sensitive person and Elaine Aron, because I am an HSP and I've read her book. Um,
Yes.
and so, yeah, no, I totally identify with, teaching college was invigorating, but also exhausting. And I also remember, like, when I was pregnant too, it just compounded it. You'd go home by the end of the
Yeah.
day. I think I'd sleep from like 3 until 8 or something.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and so I think that in my journey, when for the first few years when I was just doing the editing, um, it was great to be home. My kids were little then, and my mom would come over and watch them. So I had some social interaction, even if it wasn't very, intellectually stimulating with like my 2-year-old or whatever. Um, but the being able to sit with the headphones on and the white noise and like block everything out and just focus on the project was great. And
Mm,
then I think I got to the point though where I do like interacting with people. I do like, I think that's the difference between an introvert and an HSP is that when you're HSP,
mm,
you're not it's not that you don't like
that's true. They
social
don't always go along.
interaction.
Yeah.
It's that it tires you out faster
Mhm,
than other people, at least that's been my experience. And
mm,
so I think that that can be a challenge if you're just doing editing, is that on
mm,
the one hand, yes, you get all this time to yourself and it's great, but it can be pretty isolating. And if you have a question, you can go into one of the Facebook groups for editors and ask that question, but it's not the same as having a conversation with someone or just, being able to
mm.
vent over a cup of coffee or something like that.
Yes.
And so I've found this group that we have, and starting to teach this course to be really helpful because
Mm,
that helps me get that balance of being able to teach and talk to other people and get to know you all in our community, while also having my editing time where I can sit in a quiet room and, and get that sort of time to recharge. So I
mm,
think that in your case, I think the editing and the coaching will be a good balance. And you'll just need to keep track of how many of those coaching slots you offer, And
mhm.
that's the great thing about being a business owner is there's nobody telling you you have to coach 10 people a day, 5 days a
Yes.
week, like you can
Uh-huh.
try whatever it is. Like if you try booking 4 coaching slots in a day and you feel like it's too much, you dial it back, and you just tell people you
Yeah.
need to reschedule. And so it's totally up to you how you approach that and you can change things. And um related to this is something you said earlier about how you left academia to find work life balance, and you're already thinking about how can you make sure that you prioritize that still. And I
Mhm.
think that's very smart because I got into a situation where I too enjoy working and I work, 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 work. And then I had to stop myself and say, wait a minute, I didn't leave academia to then work weekends, And of
Yeah.
course, there are times when it happens if you have somebody with a deadline or your kids have been sick all week and you're running behind or whatever.
Mm,
But yeah, I think that's another important thing for looking forward is to remember that as much as you enjoy the work and you feel like you can do more, um, to sort of dial it back, and scheduling and those kinds of things, keeping things on the calendar can really help with that.
yeah. And I think I'm gonna, kind of adopt what you said in the sense of like thinking of everything as a little bit experimental in the beginning. Like I'm not committing to this schedule. I'm gonna try this schedule. Like I'm gonna try booking 3 clients and see how that feels for an afternoon or in a particular morning. Or I'm gonna try reserving Thursdays and Fridays for editing, just for example. Um and with the knowledge that, I have total freedom to mix that up if it's not working, um, it just made me smile a little bit because I was in the lead up to the kids going back to school, I had, like, no actual time on my hands, but I had like, I couldn't get any actual work done, but I kept sort of, like, redoing an ideal schedule for myself, like, I kept sort of thinking and, rethinking, like, how could I like, when would I schedule clients? When would I which hours would I use for editing? Um, and I found myself putting like client time, like Saturday mornings, 8 to 10 a.m. before my daughter's dance class and like Sunday evenings. And then I lived kind of the first week of the semester a little bit where my girls were both in school and, they had their activities over the weekend. And just living through that first weekend of like being back to school, of not just having like, total family time, like uninterrupted for the stretch of the summer, I realized like I'm gonna want to be with family on a Sunday evening, or I'm gonna want to sleep in on a Saturday morning. I'm not gonna, why am I from the very beginning kind of setting myself up for this onerous schedule of like, oh, set your alarm at 7 a.m. on Saturday so you can, do a client appointment at 8 a.m. And for some of it, I think is going to be like I guess being aware of those impulses toward workaholism that probably got us pretty far, in terms of getting through graduate school and surviving in academia. Kind of keeping those impulses to just work all the time in check, and also just having a little bit of like a more open-handed kind of like free-flowing attitude of like I don't need to know all the answers, on day one. I'm just going to try some things out with my schedule and leave myself the freedom to adapt that schedule as I get more information, because sometimes you do have to kind of live it to feel like, oh, this is not what I want to be doing on a Sunday evening, or this is not what I want to have to do, at the end of the day, like when my kids are getting ready for bed.
Yeah, that's so great. And you said the magic word freedom,
Yeah.
that is the beauty of, entrepreneurship, is that you have the freedom to make those decisions. And
Mhm.
I will add that uh when you're working with clients, my experience has been most of them are uh, very understanding and, don't expect you to work on weekends. But there are those who work weekends themselves or work 7 days a week. And, I'll
Mhm.
get somebody who sends me a file on Friday and says, can you have this back by Monday? And you
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
have to hold that boundary and say,
Yeah.
no, I'm sorry, I can't. I don't work on weekends.
Mhm.
And you shouldn't feel bad about that. You can hold that boundary for yourself and don't feel bad, because you should be living the life you want to live, and so
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's so great to talk with you and to see how much you've grown over the last 12 weeks and the confidence that you're building. Um, why don't you tell everybody, if there's anybody out there listening who would like to work with you, where can they find you?
So the best place is probably my website, which is juliagalindocoaching.com. If you check that
Awesome.
out, you can see how to contact me. And Paulina, let me just say too, thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation, and actually a wonderful whole 12 weeks. I know is our last class meeting is today, I think. All right.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so we're just getting into the last week. But it's truly been transformative. And I think I may have said this to you before, maybe I just thought it, but I've since leaving academia, which I did in, I think it was 2021, was my last year in academia. I've either tried, like actually tried, or just thought about trying like various alternative pathways to different careers. And I do feel like taking your editing course has been the most useful of the things that I have done, and has been the one thing that really set me up with like a true toolkit for success. Like, this is what you have to do. This is how you do it. And being in the class and having access to you has meant like there's someone to kind of shoot those questions to, of like, like I got an email asking this, what do I say? Or, how do I handle this? And that has just been really invaluable. So thank you for providing that as a resource. It's truly been a great experience for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. Thanks again for joining us, Julia, and good luck with your business.
Thanks again for listening to my interview with Julia Galindo. Julia is absolutely lovely, and it's been a pleasure to work with her in our cohort and to help her design and put in motion the business that she's always dreamed of having. If you'd like to work with Julia, you can go to her website, juliagalindocoaching.com. I'll put this link and some other resources in the show notes. And if you're thinking you might like to become an academic editor or coach, you can learn more about my course and program at acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week. If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.